Okay, we are live. Hello and welcome to the API Chronicles, Unlocking the Future, a live celebration of APIs hosted by Marqeta. My name's Sophie Churchill, I'm from Marqeta and I'm a senior account manager managing our enterprise customers in Europe, and I'll be your moderator for today's live stream. Today, we are talking with card innovation experts about their confessions. Our experts have already shared their expertise in our ebook of the same name, but for today's discussion, we'll be exploring one of the 3 R's highlighted in the ebook, relationships. Because it's not just about the functionality that a partner provides to your modern payment product. It's about how they work with you, how they respond in a crisis, and whether their values are closely aligned with yours. In short, you might be in the business of tech, but people still very much matter. So with that, I'm delighted to be joined today by Dante, Vic and Chris, who will introduce themselves in a moment. And we do have the benefit of running this as a live webinar today. So we'd love some audience participation. Please drop your questions and thoughts in the comments section during the stream, and I will do my best to get to them as and when they come up. So welcome everyone. Thank you for your time today. Would love to do some introductions. If you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, your current role and your experience to date. Vic, I'll start with you, please.
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks so much for having me today. So my name's Victoria Martin. I'm an independent compliance consultant, advising fintechs on everything from authorization to BAU compliance requirements, both for launch and to keep going. I was previously at Starling Bank as Director of Compliance and Policy, but before that I've got quite a wide range of experience both in fintech and in large banks. So started my career at RBS, but moved into the fintech space, working at Tandem and Clearbank. Also, I've worked in consultancy, so I've been very much on the client side and also in banking as a service at 10x Banking.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vic. Dante, over to you. I think you're on mute, Dante.
You would think after so long I would know better. So yeah, Dante Sakuza. I'm with Berkeley Payment Solutions. I am the VP of Revenue right now. So my remit is currently business development, client strategy work, as well as marketing elements of it. I've been in the payment space for about 20 years now. I started out in prepaid way back when web banking was a novel item, and have moved up since, working with WorldPay, Global Acquiring, Marqeta as the solutions consulting lead for a number of years. So I've seen quite a few different fits and starts from different fintechs and new ideas coming into the market. And the last is I have a consulting arm as well. For myself, it's DS Payment Advisors, and I help startups very similar to what Victoria had mentioned in her role. I help and advise customers or clients who want to stand up card wallets, different digital payment offerings, money movement options, things like that. So, but right now I'm with Berkeley.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dante. And last but not least, over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And again, thanks to the Marqeta team for inviting me to today's live stream. I'm Chris Holmes. I'm a Senior Vice President at KE. Quick introduction to KE. We're a consultancy with very strong roots in the payment space. We essentially bring the power of research and analytics and data to our clients, and we help provide the information and data and evidence for our clients to make more informed and better and faster decisions. One of the things we also pride ourselves on is also helping cut through the noise. There's so much noise in the marketplaces, I'm sure everyone's aware of that, and really identifying the information, the insight, the data to really provide the most important things to the business. So it's really focusing what matters. Personally, I've got 17 years experience in the payment space, always a consulting role. I've had the pleasure of working with a very diverse range of companies and solve a lot of key business challenges, build strategies, and a lot of that work has also involved helping companies build and refine their partner strategies. My role, and also actually Kay's footprint, has meant that much of my work has actually been on a global perspective. So I look forward to sharing some of my observations and experiences most of the experiences I can share on the webinar today. So looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So as your mute was on, Dante, I'm going to pick on you first.
Perfect. Thank you.
So from your perspective, who is the most important partner when launching a card program, and why is that?
Oy vey. So the most important partner, it depends on the type of product. So I'm going to start with, well, it depends, right? It depends on the type of product you're bringing to market. If you're bringing a product to market where your card payment or your instrument is the sole offering, then it's critical to have the right issuer, processor, and bank combination in place, right? You need banks who are willing to support the use case that you're trying to bring to market, as well as an issuer processor that has feature functionality that can help differentiate your product from everybody else in market, right? And if it's not what you're bringing to market isn't the primary thing, say it's an ancillary piece, like you do loan processing and you want to have a card payment associated with it, right? Then you worry less about, you're not going to be as focused on all things card, and you're more likely to want to partner with a program manager that can do more for you, because it's not your specialty. Your specialty is loan and underwriting, as an example. The card piece, you want to outsource that. Unless you want to pay people to be your in-house experts, you're better off partnering with a program manager who will do a lot of the groundwork around bringing a card to market or other payment methods to market. Right. So those are the two distinctive caveats.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that. So I think it's being very, very clear on what is your proposition, and also what is the licensing route that you want to go down. So do you want to become fully authorized in your own right, which can give you a lot more flexibility, particularly if you're choosing a payments processor? Or do you want to go a more simpler route, going down the appointed representative or agent route? So being very, very clear what you want to do and how you want to launch that proposition. Probably the second element to that, I would say, being a compliance person is picking a robust KYC, KYB provider as well. And will some of your partners actually provide that solution, or do you need to go out to somebody else in the market?
Thanks, guys. Yeah. And I guess still on that theme then, Vic, you might want to touch on this first. How do you ensure that you choose the right partners to support your vision?
So I think you need to be very clear on what your vision actually is. So, often I've actually worked with clients and they've got all the best intentions, but they're not actually really super clear on what they want to do. So having that really clearly defined, and also making sure that you're explaining that to partners when you are doing exploratory phases and also during RFP. I always say due diligence, it needs to be on both sides. So often it can be fairly one-sided during the RFP process. So make sure that you're doing due diligence, not just on the tech solution, but how your partners are going to be providing support. So what is the overall operational support model that they're going to be supporting you on? And probably the last thing I would say is understanding what your risk appetite is and what your partner's risk appetite is, and being flexible if you can with those appetites.
Sure, thank you. Chris, did you want to touch on that as well, about choosing the right partner?
Yeah, I think there's, I suppose it depends how long we've got to talk about this. There's so many things you can think about. I totally agree with Vic in terms of sort of knowing yourself first and having clear goals and expectations for what you want in the partnership. Sadly, on occasions, I and other colleagues in the industry, the consulting industry, have seen that people haven't spent that time really understanding what they want to get out of a partnership. What are the goals? What are the expectations? And we have to remember, if we take a step back, that partnerships or strategic alliances are critical to remain competitive in today's business landscape. So if you don't start that process off correctly, the end result is going to be poor. You're not going to really benefit from the success that you can have. And, if you look at partnerships, it's unlocking the opportunities, it's driving growth, it's creating value. So I totally agree. Starting off and understanding what your goals and expectations are. Then I'd probably say the next step is really trying to understand who's out there. So build a comprehensive list and understanding of the partners. And I'd also suggest you start broad and then be smart in how you can really start to review and narrow down that list quickly and really get to the understanding the DNA and get to grips the businesses that you may want to partner with. One of the critical things is early engagement. So once you know what partners you feel have the capabilities, the reach, etc., that may be complementary to your business or may help you achieve your objectives, you need to make sure that you communicate and engage with them. Now, this can be a lengthy process, but there should always be open lines of communication. There should be transparency. And I think transparency is so important. It's really a cornerstone of building trust. It's also, key in also building strong partnerships. And with transparent and open information sharing, that does actually create better discussions at the early stages for partnerships, and also does help, I think, drive decisions forward, more informed decisions, but also actually helps to have clear accountability. And I think also when we're talking about goals and objectives, they should be common goals and objectives. So everyone should be moving in the right direction. If people aren't having shared expectations, objectives, or goals of a partnership, you shouldn't be afraid to walk away because they will not be the right partners for you. And I think one of the challenges as well, and again, this is where open communication and time is needed, is actually spending the time to understand what the individual business goals and aspirations are and making sure that you can align those with the shared common practice. And I think when you look at these partnerships, you always want to have the view of a win-win-win. So it's a win for you, it's a win for your partner or partners, and also it's a win for your stakeholders, be that your customers or be that your investors. Something else that I think sometimes overlooked in terms of partnerships is also the importance of organizational cultures, and having strong cultural alignment is sometimes a secret sauce behind those successful partnerships. So I think ultimately it's making sure you do your homework, build the right partnerships, make sure that you always keep an eye on those partners and having that open communication.
Yeah, and just adding to that, Chris, where I've seen it actually be done really well is where prospect partners will actually let you speak to some of their clients, so you can actually get first-hand recommendations, or where things may not have worked so well, that give you that more informed decision.
There's one more piece that jumps out at me, and it's a nuance piece, and everything within fintech is a nuance, right? Because nothing is cookie cutter. It's just not a real thing, right? So the nuance that I'm seeing more and more, especially from a US market perspective, is as innovation's coming to the forefront, it's always ahead of legislation and compliance elements, right? So you might have cultural alignment with a startup who a founder has this amazing idea and he's going to figure out, the next great mousetrap, and he wants to move fast and nimble, and that's what your business does. So you have that cultural alignment, but then there's a risk involved there. Oh, nobody's ever done this before. Well, that's amazing. You're now at the forefront or the edge of breaking into something great and being that innovator, but compliance is going to catch up. Right. And I mean, legally, what the federal laws are going to be. An example of that is the due diligence elements that banking as a service has created a light on. So we look at the different banks that have just recently had issues because of they did not have enough oversight into their third-party providers, the program managers out there. And now I'm starting to see more and more banks simply refusing to bring on new programs.
Yeah. Because
the banks, it's not just that it's a new program and it's a novel idea, it's do we have the right partners in place right now? Is our third-party platform doing as much due diligence, and how much oversight do we actually have of them? Because we're seeing, we just, over the last few years, we've seen it more and more. And now a lot of the smaller regional banks in the US who use card issuing as a way to expand their business and expand their deposit value are really getting hampered by the fact that legislation is catching up and fines are being issued out, or compliance elements are being enforced now where they weren't before, when the novel or the innovative ideas were first being brought to market. And thoughts?
Yeah, you're seeing that very much in the UK market. So everything from a regulatory perspective is heading to having much more robust oversight on third parties. So, we've already got the material outsourcing obligations at the FCA. So essentially, if you are materially outsourcing to a supplier, you are ultimately liable for their actions. And then obviously the latest regulation on critical third parties as well. So we are very much seeing that in the UK, that you need to be holding your providers up to the same level regulatory standards that you're holding.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Dante.
No, I was just going to say, and by holding your partners up to those standards or higher levels of standards, it creates a strain on those partners. That's the other side of it, where suddenly they have to increase their compliance side to be able to answer to the reporting, to be able to answer all of the inquiries, do all of the audits. So you've created an overhead burden that wasn't there before. So that actually puts a strain on the existing partnerships, right? So whoever's going to solve those elements faster are going to be the winners at the end of the day, at least for a short while until compliance catches up again. Yeah,
and I think that's where the open lines of communication, having accountability and trust with each other is really important. And also it's something similar we see if we're looking at some of the areas, looking at sustainability at the moment, and considering your supply chain and making sure your supply chain is sharing your ESG principles, it's able to provide data on their scope 3 emissions, for example. There's so many parts where there has to be that data, and there has to be that trust, and there has to be that commitment for people to make this work. Again, business is people driven, right? So if the people aren't committed, it's not going to succeed.
Yeah,
definitely. I love the touch on the shared success piece there, and the segue also into sort of the culture side as well. Vic, when we're talking about cultural alignment, how do you truly ensure that a prospective partner that you're looking at has the same commitment to innovation as you, and does it really matter?
Yeah, so look, I think cultural alignment is always quite difficult to assess, because how do you actually know what the culture is like without really working directly with that partner? So I think you need to look at what is your business type, and does your partner have a track record in success with similar business models? So, if you've got a partner that generally just supports tier 1 banks, they might not be the right partner for you. And the reason why I say that is generally when I've worked in fintechs or startups, generally they will need more support on that journey with them. So you need to have a look at what is the operation model going to be, and is there any flexibility around that support model? Often I've seen some of the tech providers, if you need to change something, either you can't change it or it comes at a great cost. So again, you need to be factoring that into your partner selection. Probably the second thing I would say is understanding what your partner's roadmap is as well. So, are they actually going to be developing the product aligned with what your expectations are, or can you actually improve your proposition with some of those product enhancements?
That's a really good point there. And I think just from my own experience working with customers so closely, a lot do say, it's really great to hear sometimes when they say, actually, we can see a lot of our culture with yours as well. And so then I guess, as like you say, when you start actually working with them, you do start to see if that's a good fit for you, really. With card programs, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to think about, and it's easy to become overwhelmed with the scale of relationships needed to make a product work. How do you suggest companies tackle this conundrum? Dante, if you can touch on this first.
A bit of it is citing what Vic said earlier. It's about understanding who you are as a business and what you want to be able to bring. Like truly having an identity, a self-awareness and identity about who you are is critical. I have seen horrible examples of founders who have these great ideas and they're like, we're going to start with a digital wallet, but they know nothing about it. And then later on, it turns out, well, they actually wanted to do something completely different, and the wallet was a piece of that, right? And it's not actually their focus. So as soon as boards say, oh, well, you really need to focus on this other element first, then everything gets put on hold on the digital wallet side, as an example. So for me, how do you get around that? Knowing what you want to bring to market, right? Being flexible, being willing to change in, what is it? It's move forward fast, fail fast, learn, try again, right? There's truth in that, but I think the way our our system is set up, our system being the card ecosystem is set up, everybody wants a contract. Nobody wants to take the risk, right? So everybody wants a setup fee. And if you don't know what you're doing, trying to bring something to market, and you have to pay all of these people setup fees and get into contractual obligations, and then suddenly you pivot, well, you let go of all the money you just spent all those months, farming for through investment, right? So for me, if you know yourself, you know your project, you know where you want to go, you've done the due diligence of your partners that you're bringing on board, and you're looking for partners who are willing to have some level of risk appetite because it's a new business you're bringing, as well as partners who have been around long enough to be able to be a solid advisor and not a vendor, right? It's always going to be that. And honestly, I'm having flashbacks to my days at Marqeta, Sophie, because that was one of the common statements. It's, you don't want a vendor. You want a partner who will help you and guide you, and you can educate just like you can give back to them and educate them. Vendors don't care about that. Vendors are like, this is how much it costs me. I need to charge a markup, and we're going to push transactions through, right? And that's all they're worried about. You need partners you need people in your sphere, in your ecosystem, who are going to partner, have a reasonable risk appetite for what you're trying to bring to market. Because if you don't have that, it will fail just out of the commercial elements or the operational elements or the compliance elements. There's always an element that can be caught up, even though there's cultural alignment. It's all of the things we've said. And now I feel like I'm rambling. So next, anybody else?
I completely agree with that. I mean, look, I've had clients that want to do the big bang approach, want to do everything for day one, and it never ever works. You'll have 2 to 3 year delays with the proposition. So my advice would be, like, start small, start with a really simple proposition. So, if you're going to do payments accounts, start with really simplistic payments accounts before you start doing, expanding your product set into, say, for example, lending. So test, learn. And I would say be really clear what your milestones are with your vendors and your partners. Often, like, as you said, Dante, they are built into the contract. So you want to have flexibility with those milestones before right. you're on the hook for paying. The other thing I would say, probably 2 points from a compliance perspective. The first one, make sure you know what the regulatory requirements are for your proposition. So again, can you actually have a more simplistic regulatory framework and then expand on that for day 2? And then my second point is, don't underestimate licensing timescales. So, in the UK at the moment, we are seeing sort of FCA approvals for both agent and also payments licensing being, incredibly long lead time. So if you are dependent on FCA or another regulator approval, be very, very realistic with those expectations.
The last thing I'd add on this, I think we mentioned the fear of failures. Don't fear failure. It's often the best way to learn. And sometimes small incremental change can lead to greater step change. And I think, we definitely see a difference when we're working with sort of more the digital providers versus legacy providers. There's a different appetite. Obviously, there's different challenges that each of those businesses are operating, but there shouldn't be that fear of failure. And it really does help learn and move people forward. So that would be one key call out. I want to make sure people is learn from those failings, move forward, and just make sure you don't do them again.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to pivot either. As you said, if you actually do a piece of customer research and you realise actually customers don't want that, it's fine to actually change your proposition and go in a different direction.
Yeah, and also that should be consistent, especially in the UK. We have customer duty. We've got to make sure you're constantly looking at the value you're providing, and does your proposition, does your segmentation, does your marcoms, does your channel approach, does it optimize the success? And again, I don't think, given the pace of change we're seeing in the market as well, changing expectations, there is a much quicker or moving landscape, and being able to stay ahead of the curve as much as you can is really important, but also responding as quick as you can as well is also critical.
Yeah, all excellent points there. And a lot to take on, but as you say, flexibility is key. I definitely think, knowing that actually if it goes wrong, then you can change your direction. And again, that research that you do in the upfront, if you can speak to people that can share maybe their failures, let's say, or things that didn't go wrong, and you can learn from it, I think that's always good as well. So I'm going to move on to kind of more like the contractual side. Vic, I know in the ebook we talk about SLAs in some detail, and I'd like to hear your views on getting to the stage where SLAs are evoked.
Yeah. So in an ideal world, you wouldn't break an SLA, but it will always generally happen. So look, I think my sort of first point would be you need to be very realistic with your SLAs setting at point of contract negotiation. So, when you're starting to draft up, MSA statements of work, being really realistic and actually have that debate with your providers before, you set them in stone. I would say, when you are starting to see SLA breaches, make sure that you're actually collecting data around those breaches, and rather than it being a end conversation, right, we've had this number of SLA breaches, actually have a very collaborative conversation as part of your ongoing supplier management. Because what I would say is you do not want that relationship to break down if you have, been working with that partner for a significant amount of time, or they've been on that propositional journey with you. Probably my next point is, if you do have an SLA breach, actually understanding what is the impact of that. So is there an impact? Is there a customer impact? For example, could there be potential detriment to your customers if you have a particularly nasty outage? And also understanding, actually, are they regulatory notifiable, which there is an obligation in the UK for particular types of SLA breaches. So again, I think going back to the point of having, collaborative, transparent conversations. So when there are SLA breaches, you can actually work through those. And it may be a point that you've actually set those unrealistically right at the start, and you need to go back into the contract and revisit them.
Yeah, great point. Anyone else want to touch on that at all, that topic? We'll move on. And just a reminder that if anyone does have any questions, as I say, we are live, pop them into the comments, and I'll try to get to them ASAP. I'm going to kind of pivot over to like regional differences now, because as I say, we were talking about culture, and different cultures have very different approaches to building trust. According to research by Harvard Business Review, for example, North America and European cultures assume trustworthiness and test for openness, whereas typically in East Asian cultures, they rely on reputation and a test for competence. Have we got any thoughts on this and how it influences partnership choices? Chris, I know you've worked a lot around the world globally. Maybe you can kick us off with discussing kind of your perceptions on this.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the first thing we should take away or talk about is actually you can never underestimate or ignore the power of culture. I think if you do, it's at your peril. And the reason for this is that culture plays such an integral role in shaping the success of any partnership. And I think when we look at the culture, we've got to remember this is looking beyond just shared values and beliefs. We're also encompassing things such as the way partners communicate, they make decisions, how they make decisions, how people work towards achieving the common goals. And understanding and appreciating these cultural differences. And by doing this, you're more likely to find those common grounds. And this was really important when you start to face different perspectives. And this will happen in discussions and partnerships over time. And also culturally, I think it's really important because this will also really help avoid misunderstandings. And we hear obviously horror stories about some misunderstandings that happen in business worlds. And I also think it's important for everyone as well to remember that and we have to remind ourselves this quite often, there isn't a right or wrong culture. Partners bring their unique perspectives, and this is based upon their background, their experiences. And it's really important that the partners embrace and approach these differences in a positive way with an open mind and also with a willingness to learn from each other. So one of the key call-outs from my experience is that you really do need to understand and embrace those different social norms, the customs, the different ways of doing business and building relationships. And, you know, it was interesting, we were talking about sort of Eastern cultures, because in those cultures, a small cultural faux pas could actually, if it is innocent and well-intended, or, you know, could have catastrophic impact on your reputation, where competence, trust is really important. How you conduct yourselves is really important, and it's a sign of, are you a trustworthy person? And there's always going to be a degree of tolerance for non-natives, but I would really suggest and recommend that you really avoid testing those boundaries. And one of the things that can help you, I think, understand culture and really make sure you're internalizing yourself is always remember to consciously and actively listen to what's actually being said. So not just what's being spoken. It's really important to think about the types of words that are being used, how the response is being positioned or toned, the body language of people, who's responding. And an example I always like to use with my clients and colleagues is, you know, for some cultures, yes doesn't actually mean yes in the context of reaching an agreement or closing a deal. It sometimes just means, yes, I understand what you're saying, or yes, we will review and we'll follow up on the points discussed. And also we do have to remember that culturally, and this is an impact on partnership progression, is sometimes the speed of decision making can be quite different. So in some cultures, you know, Western cultures, we may have, you know, days or weeks in terms of decision being reached. In other cultures, the norm can be months, and you have to make sure you understand this and respect this, because if you don't respect it, that again is being seen as unrespectful and could potentially have a negative impact on the view that people have of you. I think also, and it's worth calling out, that actually one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is often for companies' own internal cultures and how they manage those cultures in their own businesses. And, you know, I have seen on so many occasions, and we've advised and we've helped businesses overcome this, whereby you may have a head office based in, just for example, the US or the UK or Australia, pushing out, you know, their marketing campaigns, their products, their propositions across regions, and they're failing to actually take on board or listen to what those cultural norms are, and also how things should be adjusted. So we often see that when the customization, the adaptation doesn't happen, there's weaker propositions being launched. Maybe the marcoms isn't being as effective, or the targeting strategies isn't being effective in its outcomes or in its implementation. And that's just obviously leading to suboptimal outcome, you know, product failures, and actually organizational conflict overall. And I think also when you're looking for partners, understanding the ability for them to deliver in region is really important as well. So on paper, you know, some of your existing partners may tick all the boxes, or there could be some household names you think, yes, they'd be fantastic. But if they don't have that true local experience or understand the culture or have the capabilities on the ground, the relationship with the partnership is actually probably more likely to under-deliver and potentially at worst detract value. So I think it's really important. You really can't underestimate it when you're looking at culture and incorporating that into your partnership strategy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that was my key point, was track record of actually delivering in that market. So, you know, I was lucky enough to work actually in Saudi Arabia, and actually the providers that we were selecting there were very, very different from a cultural perspective, because they had to be from an Islamic finance perspective to operate in that region. I think also looking at regulatory perspectives in different regions can be quite different. So like if you look at the UK, we are very much a principle-based regime, whereas if you go to the States, everything is, you know, down to the regulatory minutiae. So I think being very clear on the markets that you want to enter, you know, have a really clear go-to-market strategy, and make sure that you've chosen providers that have got a track record of implementing in those markets.
The last thing for me is the product you're bringing to market in the different regions. Does the success of the product is still going to rely on the market demand? If it's one customer you have, do you have somebody willing to pay for the new service feature or whatever it is at a regional level? Then you need to understand, is the product that was so successful in Canada or in Europe actually going to resonate the same and solve the same issue in a new region that you're going into? The reality is those regions may not have the same issue. with it. Everything might be working just fine, and suddenly you bring a new product to market that actually detracts from your reputation because you, to Chris's point, are not listening to what is being asked or what is being said. So it's I've seen this a few times now where there are working robust products in specific regions, and the drive is, oh, well, we're now going to go into Australia, or we're now going to go into other parts of North Africa, and it just doesn't resonate. The product doesn't resonate because that market is so completely different, and they may find your product to actually be burdensome because they didn't think there was a problem there to begin with. So understanding that is critical when picking the markets and how we're addressing and how we're aligning our product to the value of the region we're working in.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Dante, as well. And you're right. It's really not just a copy and paste exercise where you can kind of do it. What works in one region might not work in another. And we're not even talking globally. You can even talk in Europe, where you've got various different markets and areas where it can be vastly different, and they can actually be quite close in geography proximity. So yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So this is an API Chronicles live stream. So it would be remiss not to talk about APIs and API powered technology like Marketers. Dante, you used to work at Marketer, so I'm going to pick on you. Not just for that reason, but how much have APIs facilitated the ability for new entrants to the card issuance market?
I think it's been absolutely critical because when APIs first evolved in this space, it made everything real time. I mean, there are still banks that I work with right now that I'm a user of that run things in batch process. And there's a difference in the batch process timing between their online presence and their mobile presence, as well as the standard batch processing that they do for everything else. And as an end user, it's extremely frustrating. That the reality is APIs allow our customers and program or products out there to be real time, to be highly informative, and without that, we are left with either logging into a web portal. Our customers would be left logging into web portals, having to look up information there, as opposed to something like an app that is driven off of APIs, right? So there are different levels in which it impacts it. But for me, any financial product that is being brought to market that doesn't have some level of API real-time capabilities is a non-product. It's just not going to be competitive. It may work, but it is not the user experience that is now expected. An example would be kids. If kids found a roll of film right now and they said, oh, what do we do with this? Oh, there's this place down the street and they'll develop that film for you. And the kids go there and they're like, yeah, we want a rush job. We want to see what's on here. And the guy says, oh, well, rush service, that's going to be $20 more. And by the way, rush means that you'll get it in an hour instead of tomorrow. The world doesn't work that way anymore, right? And I think APIs are the catalyst that have allowed us to say a rush job means within about 50 milliseconds, right? As opposed to 4 hours from now when the company does a batch process. So it's absolutely critical to any product being brought to bear right now.
I think it's also important that in your proposition of marketing, it sort of goes back. I think Vic was saying this about understanding your audience. So real time, I totally agree, is important, but how real time is real time. So for some businesses, there is the need to have really real time instantaneous access to information. And then for other businesses, if you think some of the smaller businesses, there is a need for the information, but not to the same degree as what you may see from a mid-sized business or a larger business. So I think it's very much in terms of the building proposition, in terms of thinking about what your differentiators are as well, linking that back to the needs of the user is really important. And again, it sort of goes back to the point of one size doesn't fit all, because in terms of what you're offering, it does need to be tailored based upon the needs. If I look at sort of a vertical perspective, yes, there are some different needs across verticals, but typically we see that different sized businesses will have common needs. Again, there are different needs, but there's more commonality, I think, on the size of business. So sort of factor that into your thoughts. Also factor that into your partner decisions as well, because you may find that some partners are going to be more suited to working with the small segment, the mid-corp space. Others may be much more suited to working with much more the large market or the multinational segments.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely showing my age because I definitely remember having my camera film like ready to be taken in, and it taken a while.
Yeah. Can I interject? There's one last thing that's really interesting about APIs and being brought to market. Chris, you kind of touched on it. What is real time? APIs are simply the messaging platform, but it's about extracting the data. Where does the data live? What's sitting there? When was the last time that was refreshed? I think as innovators come into the market and they do want to use APIs, there's this idea that, oh, well, our vendor or our partner has APIs. We'll just code to the APIs. That's great. That is not the end all be all. The reality is, when working with APIs, you have to know when to call the API, what questions you're going to be asking, what data is required in your question to get the end result of the response back that you need. Once you get the response, what do you then do with it? Do you store the information? Do you display a pop-up? Does that trigger an SMS? Like, what happens from there? And I think there's, generally speaking, when we say, oh, it's an API shop, well, great. But what are you doing on the front end before the call? And what are you doing on the back end after the call? That really is the hard part of building out a user experience and building out any type of financial product on APIs. But at the same time, APIs are great. I need the information. I sent in my appropriate query, and now I have the information back. That's amazing. It's the other stuff is the heavy lift for anybody bringing a financial product to market. Still better than what it used to be, by the way. One last little bit there. So,
thanks, guys. Let's move on to future proofing, which we have touched on a little bit, but when it comes to relationships with the ecosystem partners, Chris, how do you ensure you're selecting a partner that will support you over the long term?
I think it comes back to a lot of the points we have touched upon. So doing your homework, being transparent, investing that time and effort into building that strong partnership culture. And I really do feel, and I've seen from just the experience I've had, that really does reap the rewards. I think also what we need to make sure that's happening is there's that critical and analytical review of the partnership. So making sure and constantly reviewing the goals and expectations behind the partnership, the success of the partnership, why have things failed, why there have been successes, how can you mirror those successes and amplify those? And that should be across all the parties involved in the partnership. And I think by doing that, you're increasingly showing commitment, you're deepening the commitment that the current partners have, and also you're also identifying whether your partnership structure and strategy needs to change, and maybe there are potentially new partners that you may potentially want to work with.
Great. And with the best partners, tech and preparation, things can still go wrong, and they do. Vic, have you got any stories that you can share, what you know now, with the benefit of hindsight? And this is open to everyone, but we'll start with you, Vic.
So I've been fortunate to both be on the client side and the provider/partner side. So I have got a few horror stories. But I mean, look, I think probably the first one is being really clear on what the roles and responsibilities are across your partner ecosystem. So who is responsible for what? And particularly I've seen it when there has been regulatory change. So, if you've got incredibly tight timescales to deliver something, making sure that nothing gets dropped. And I have had, clients say, oh, hang on a minute, I thought you were delivering this for me, and we weren't responsible, but it was not clear from the outset. The other thing around also on that, probably being very clear if there's any kind of integration layer that needs to be provided between your solution and your client solution. Again, I've had a few very nasty conversations where we've had to bring in another third party to actually essentially bridge the gap because the client thought, you know, we were going to deliver something for them. And then probably my last point is being very clear on what your operational and business processes are that need to be in place to support what that partner is providing. So again, a really good example is transaction screening. So, you know, you'll have a fraud partner who will be providing you with all the transaction alerts. What do you actually do with those alerts? Do you need to have a team that's essentially reviewing those alerts? What's the customer action, etc.? And again, having that operational model very clearly mapped out so that you don't get any dropped balls.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you're saying reminds me. So there's this whole idea of what does it take to bring a financial product to market? And you're kind of touching on that there. The reality is the market, you have to have a willing customer, a paying, willing customer who has a need, right? You need to have the right commercials in place amongst all of your partners. You need to make sure that everybody's making the right amount of money, right amount of money for them, and it stays commercially viable. You need to have the support structure in place, like what you said. Well, you know, you need to make sure that if a report needs to be pulled and you don't have the technology in place to get the data, you have to have a body there to pull the data, to do something with it, to send it off. Then there's a technology piece. Do all of the partners in the ecosystem actually know how to talk to each other through technology, right? And then the last, and arguably the most important, is the risk and compliance elements of it. When a risk change comes across, if it's a compliance change comes across and it's a mandated change, who's responsible for paying for the fix, right? Is it going to be the issuing bank? Is it going to be the issuer processing platform? Is it the customer? Is it the program manager? Who needs to make sure that it's there? Because at the end of the day, compliance is, well, it needs to be there. And everyone's going to point fingers until somebody actually picks up the money and the work and they do the job to make it compliant. So if any of those 5 variables are not accounted for, then you're going to have ruin with your financial product. So it's just a bigger part of it. It's like the 5 pillars of a financial tool. And I think that a lot of that gets lost as we see people trying to build out programs. They say, oh, we're buying business. So they're actually going to service for less than what it actually costs them, thinking that there's an upside. So there's a risk side to it. Or compliance is the last thing that they're thinking about. But if they're thinking that way, the problem is they may have all 4 other components, but just because they can do it doesn't mean they should do it. So compliance can ground them. And I think a lot of this is learnings that are essential for people in a consulting business or a product management mindset need to be aware of when dealing with customers who are trying to bring new products to market. There you go.
Thanks. Any other horror stories? Hopefully not.
Horror stories. Sorry, I forgot we're on horror stories.
No, you're good.
Horror stories.
Yeah,
Let me tell you. No, they're out there everywhere. And normally it comes down to, in the early stages, a lot of it is, I don't care about anything else. It's the commercial element.
Yeah.
I have an idea. I know I'm going to make money. How do I get this done the cheapest? Well, the problem is you're ignoring everything else. And if you don't put all of those other facets in place, it's going to fold on you. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a waste of money, either your own bootstrap money or your investment money. And I have a list of names, but I'm not saying. So
yeah, I won't use a specific client, but we missed a key piece of regulation, and literally everything, all other build had to be stopped until we could meet this piece of regulation. So actually, the product development was completely put on hold at a substantial financial cost because we'd missed something. So and I'm sure there's probably other horror stories out there like that.
Yeah, we'll try to move on from those. But yeah, thank you guys. And this kind of ties in nicely, Chris. You're in the field of research. So from your perspective, how important is the role of research in building successful relationships?
I would say very, very important. It's if we sort of link back to the compliance piece, it's really important understanding what the compliance requirements, also in terms of the journey that you have, you think about touch points of KYC, KYB, what are the compliance elements in your journey you need to build in. So that's really critical, but it's also understanding the needs and wants as well. And I think we said earlier on, there has to be a need and want. What problem are you solving for? What is a partnership really going to help overcome? Is a partnership needed to do that? So I think it's really critical. And actually, I think when you start looking at new product launches or proposition refinements, you should never underestimate. And I would recommend you don't underinvest in the research to support those decisions and actually run a thorough process. So, and I caveat as well, you don't always need to boil the ocean with research. I think it's been very smart and specific in terms of what you look at. So when we look at product launches, proposition, refinement or development, we have to remember that they're not isolated activities. You've got a build that has to take into account the context of your business, your market, your target audience, the needs and wants, for example, but also what your competition are doing. So that could be competition now, but also competition in the future. And we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years that the type of competitors that payment companies are facing are changing. You've got people moving upstream, downstream, sideways. And when I started my consulting career, it was quite clear about who operated where. But now you've got, for example, acquirers issuing card. You've got ERPs, AP solution providers, AR solution providers. Again, looking at payments, for example, there's lending products being incorporated. So there's a much greater sort of a solution drive to provide an ecosystem to a customer to make yourself more sticky and sort those customers in. And I think this is where research is really important, because it helps you understand, what are the table stakes that you need to have in a proposition? What are the differentiators that you can create and carve out and promote? What are the things that you can actually divest in as well? Because they'd be part of maybe previous activity that no longer resonates, or actually it's something your customers just don't find of interest anymore, given how a market or their needs have moved on. So I think that's really important. But also as well, when you're looking at the scalability and the commercialization of products and opportunities, this is where research provides that evidence. And again, I'll always caveat that you have to be careful you don't have a GIGO situation of putting garbage in, you get garbage out. So you have to think through what you're looking at to make sure that's framed correctly, and that you can isolate the variables that you really need to look at. But that's critical when you're looking at pricing. What should you be pricing? That links back to willingness to pay. It's pricing models. Should it be a fixed fee? Should it be a freemium? Should it be a subscription based? But also then, what does that mean to demand? So how can you then start to model demand? And if you have investors who are pushing to understand how commercially viable their investment is, and you are as a business, having the ability to say what the demand is and understanding how you can get to that demand is also really important. So for me, and I may be a bit skewed because I'm such a strong believer and advocate of research, I think it's really important. But research also has to be done correctly. You need to make sure that you're looking at the right areas, because you can do something quick and dirty, but you just won't have the right information to then inform the business decisions that you're basing that or using that information for.
Thanks, Chris. And before we kind of move to final thoughts, Dante, it would be great to touch on BAS and banks approving new programs in North America.
Yep. This kind of goes to what I was mentioning earlier on. In the US specifically, it comes down to a number of banks have been fined recently within the last few years because they do not have enough oversight into third-party program managers. And those could be, so let me step back. The reason that this is a thing is third-party program managers say, we have our compliance. Sorry, this is my perspective on this. We have our compliance in place, and the bank tells us what we have to do, and we do what the bank says, right? And the historical way of evaluating whether or not a third party was actually doing what they said they were doing, what they were supposed to do, is you do an occasional audit. So because you can't audit the 10 million files that come through of new accounts that are being set up every quarter or every month, or depending on your scale, right? The banks have gotten caught up in trusting the third parties to do the work, and their audits weren't showing enough mishaps or failures to stay compliant at the third party, only to have larger events take place, more scrutiny get applied, and suddenly you have the government's actually fining the banks. And now the banks are afraid of that because the compliance and, more importantly, the enforcement of the compliance has actually come fast and furious from the US government, and smaller banks are clamming up. They want to make sure that every one of their third parties are actually doing everything that they're supposed to do. And some of the smaller banks who are trying to use banking as a service or extending their issuer licensing to these third parties are actually afraid that they won't be able to either keep up with the compliance and the audits of the third parties, or the third parties aren't able to keep up with the compliance request of the banks, and they're just walking away, meaning that they're not taking on more business. And as they're keep on refusing is a tough word, as they no longer will accept new use cases or new clients coming on or new ideas going to market, then that's leaving third-party providers kind of isolated on an island. And it's all because the bank wants to protect themselves, which all makes sense. At the end of the day, it's all there to protect AML and also the end users. So, when CFSB gets involved here. So I'm not sure really what the solve is for that. I think that it's potentially triggering a contracting of or a consolidation of banking as a service providers. So these smaller banks who thought, okay, here's a good time to jump into banking as a service, there was all kind of buzz around it. Now they're going, oh, there's a whole bunch of risk and compliance issues we didn't know about, or we did, but we didn't think it was a big deal. They're either getting out bought, or they're getting consolidated by the larger banks, right? So, and this is a common thing that happens in the payment space. We get this expansion of services through multiple players, and then the large banks chew them up and bring everything back and contract. And then people get frustrated with the way the banks work and the slowness of the bank, the structural rigidity of the bank. So then you start having new innovators come out and say, well, we can do this piece better than that bank. And they start eating the elephant one bite at a time. The bank and the industry expands again by different vendors. And then regulation comes in and everything starts contracting again. I think this is a moment of contraction where we're actually seeing these services that used to be just banks that suddenly got split out to more community banks is now getting reconsolidated. Those are my thoughts. It's but it makes it challenging for an innovator to get something to market. So
yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that, Dante. I can see where you're coming from. So we're almost at time, actually. This hour's gone very quickly. And as I say, considering that we've been talking about relationships and a lot of that, let's go to final thoughts. And I'd love to hear maybe one tip or recommendation from each of you which you'd give to someone embarking on a card program launch or relaunch with kind of relationships in the sort of forefront of your mind here. So Vic, I'll start with you on this one.
Very simple. So building very transparent and collaborative conversations with your partners. So making sure, if you're building that proposition, that they're on that journey with you.
Love that. Thanks.
For me, building off of that, I think the next step of that piece is really understanding the roles and responsibilities across the board. That way you're aligned in expectation. And if you're failure to be aligned, even on smaller items, it can be detrimental because of the nuances involved with how complex the banking structure is.
And from my side, I'd say it's definitely knowing your target audience, because the needs and wants have changed, but that's critical in terms of understanding features and benefits that are being offered, thinking about any reward programs that could be offered as part of a card program as well, and sort of understanding the need for the mix of the lifestyle rewards versus travel focused rewards versus more B2B focused rewards as well, and the different types of tiers that you can have in that to add value and embed yourself as the partner by giving value back to your customers.
Excellent. Well, as I say, we've come to time now. Thank you so much, Vic, Chris and Dante, for your time today. It's been really valuable, some great insights there and information. And thank you for those that have joined us today. Really appreciate your time today. And we will see you at the next Marketer live stream. Look forward to it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.